The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1884, and Josephine Parker knew before her mother's trembling hands even broke the seal that her life in Philadelphia was about to end forever. She had been foolish, reckless even, allowing Thomas Whitmore to court her in secret, believing his whispered promises of marriage before succumbing to desires that proper young ladies were supposed to suppress until their wedding night. When her condition became impossible to hide, Thomas had disappeared like morning fog, and her family's social standing crumbled like sun-baked clay. The baby came early, a tiny girl who drew only 3 breaths before God called her home, but the damage to the Parker name was already done. Now Josephine stood on the platform at Philadelphia's Broad Street station, clutching a carpetbag and a one-way ticket to Silver Reef, Utah, where her father's spinster sister owned a boarding house and had agreed, with great reluctance, to take in her disgraced niece. The train journey stretched endlessly before her, each mile carrying her farther from everything she had known. Her mother had not even come to see her off, the shame too great to bear in public. Only her father appeared, his face carved from stone, pressing a small purse of coins into her hand without meeting her eyes. "Your aunt expects you to work for your keep," he said, his voice hollow. "Perhaps out there, where no one knows you, you can start fresh. But you are no longer welcome in this house, Josephine. You have made your choices." The words cut deeper than any blade could have, but Josephine lifted her chin and boarded the train without tears. She had cried enough in the dark months since her baby died, since she realized that society's forgiveness was reserved for men like Thomas, while women like her carried the burden of scandal alone. The train lurched forward, and she watched Philadelphia disappear, wondering if she would ever see it again, wondering if she even wanted to. Days blurred together as the landscape transformed outside her window. The rolling green hills gave way to flat prairies, then to mountains that scraped the sky, and finally to the stark beauty of the Utah desert. Other passengers came and went, most of them keeping their distance from the young woman traveling alone. Josephine learned to recognize the judgment in their sidelong glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she passed. She kept to herself, reading the same book until the words blurred, counting the hours until this journey would end. Silver Reef appeared through the dust like a mirage on the 8th day of travel. The town had sprung up in the 1870s when silver was discovered in the sandstone, an oddity that geologists said should not exist, but made prospectors rich nonetheless. By 1884, the mines were still producing, and the town bustled with the energy of people chasing fortune. But Josephine saw none of the promise others might have. To her, it was simply the end of the line, the place where fallen women went to disappear. The train wheezed to a stop at the small station, and Josephine gathered her belongings with mechanical precision. Her hands shook despite her efforts to remain composed. Through the window, she could see the platform, sparsely populated compared to the crowds back east. A few miners in dusty clothes, a Chinese merchant with bundles of goods, a woman in a severe black dress who must be Aunt Margaret, judging by the resemblance to Josephine's father in the harsh set of her jaw. Then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, tall and lean, with the weathered look of a man who spent his days under the unforgiving sun. His hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair and a face that was handsome in a rugged way that would have made the Philadelphia ladies whisper behind their fans. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, faded denim and worn leather, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested quiet confidence rather than swagger. And he was looking directly at the train, directly at her window, with an intensity that made her breath catch. Josephine looked away quickly, gathering her carpet bag and the small trunk that held everything she had been allowed to bring. When she stepped down from the train, the dry heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the humid springs of Pennsylvania. The air smelled of sage and dust and possibility, though she tried not to let herself hope for anything beyond survival. Josephine. Her aunt's voice was as cold as her letter had been. "Come along. We do not dawdle in the street." But before Josephine could move toward her aunt, the cowboy was there, stepping forward with a deliberate stride. He tipped his hat first to Aunt Margaret, then to Josephine, and when he spoke, his voice was low and warm, with the soft drawl of someone raised in the West. "Beg your pardon, Miss Margaret, but I could not help noticing your niece has a trunk. I would be happy to help carry it to the boarding house. No lady should have to haul heavy baggage in this heat." Aunt Margaret's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but before she could refuse, the cowboy had already lifted Josephine's trunk as if it weighed nothing. He turned to Josephine with a smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "Name is Harrison Vance, miss. Welcome to Silver Reef." Josephine opened her mouth but found no words. She was accustomed to men who spoke in rehearsed pleasantries, who measured every interaction for social advantage. Harrison Vance looked at her as if she were simply a person deserving of kindness, not a scandal to be managed or avoided. "I am Josephine Parker," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Vance. Just Harrison, if you please. We are not overly formal out here." He started walking, and Josephine fell into step beside him while Aunt Margaret followed with obvious disapproval radiating from every stiff movement. The boarding house was 3 streets from the station, a 2-story wooden structure that had been painted white once, but now wore the sun-bleached gray of everything in this desert town. Harrison carried the trunk up the front steps and set it down carefully in the entrance hall, refusing the coin that Aunt Margaret grudgingly offered. "No need for that, Miss Margaret. Just being neighborly." His eyes found Josephine again, and there was something in his gaze she could not quite name. "I hope you will like Silver Reef, Miss Parker. It is a good town for fresh starts. We care more about who a person is now than who they were yesterday." The words hung in the air like a benediction, and Josephine felt something crack in her chest, the protective ice she had built around her heart showing its first fissure. How could he possibly know what she needed to hear? How could a stranger offer more kindness in 5 minutes than her own family had shown in months? Aunt Margaret cleared her throat sharply. "That will be all, Mr. Vance. Thank you for your help. Come along, Josephine. We have much to discuss." Harrison tipped his hat once more, but as he turned to leave, he looked back at Josephine one last time. "I hope to see you around town, Miss Parker. Silver Reef is a good place to find your footing. Shame has no place here, not for those willing to work hard and build something new." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, and Josephine stood frozen, his words echoing in her mind. Shame has no place here. Could such a place truly exist? Could she really find a new beginning in this strange desert town so far from everything she had known? "Come," Aunt Margaret said, her voice cutting through Josephine's thoughts. "I will show you to your room, and then we must establish the rules of this household. Your father wrote to me about your situation. I agreed to take you in out of Christian duty, but I will not have you bringing scandal to my establishment. The men who board here are respectable miners and merchants. You will keep to yourself, work hard, and speak to no one of your past indiscretions. Is that understood?" "Yes, Aunt Margaret," Josephine replied, the ice reforming around her heart. For a brief moment, Harrison Vance had made her believe that mercy might be possible, but her aunt's cold words were a reminder that some sins were never forgiven, only relocated. The room Aunt Margaret showed her was small and spare, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the dusty street. It was nothing like her bedroom in Philadelphia with its rose wallpaper and lace curtains, but Josephine told herself she was grateful to have any space at all. Many fallen women ended up in far worse circumstances. "You will rise at 5 to help prepare breakfast for the boarders," Aunt Margaret instructed, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "After breakfast is cleared, you will help with laundry. In the afternoons, there is mending, cleaning, and preparation for supper. Sundays we attend church services, and you will sit in the back and keep your eyes downcast. I have told no one here about your shame, but I will not have you attracting attention that might lead to questions. Do you understand?" "Yes, Aunt Margaret." "Your father has sent money for your first month's keep, but after that, you will need to earn your way. If you work diligently, I will allow you to stay. If you prove troublesome or fail to meet expectations, you will need to find other arrangements. There are no second chances, Josephine. You have already used yours." After her aunt left, Josephine sat on the edge of the narrow bed and allowed herself to cry silently, the tears running hot down her cheeks. She had expected this coldness, had prepared herself for it, but that made it no easier to bear. Her baby daughter was buried in a Philadelphia cemetery under a stone that bore no name. Her former life was ashes, and now she was expected to be grateful for the privilege of scrubbing floors and living in shame. But then she remembered Harrison Vance's words, "Shame has no place here." His voice had been so certain, so kind. Perhaps he had only been making conversation, the sort of empty pleasantry that people offered. Yet something in his eyes suggested he had meant every word. Josephine wiped her tears and stood, moving to the window. The sun was setting over the red rock formations in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple she had never seen in Philadelphia. The beauty of it took her breath away. Perhaps this harsh, strange land could offer something her old life never had. Perhaps in Silver Reef, she could discover who Josephine Parker truly was, beneath the weight of other people's expectations and judgments. The first weeks in Silver Reef passed in a blur of backbreaking work. Josephine rose before dawn each morning to help cook massive breakfasts for the 12 men who boarded at Aunt Margaret's establishment. She learned to make the strong coffee that miners demanded, to fry eggs and bacon in quantities that would have fed her entire family back in Philadelphia, to bake bread that could withstand the dry desert heat. Her hands, which had once been soft and cared for, became rough and calloused. Her back ached constantly from hauling water and scrubbing floors, but despite the hardship, something inside her began to shift. There was a strange freedom in physical labor, in being too exhausted at the end of the day to dwell on the past. The work was honest, her contribution visible and necessary. Unlike the endless social performances required of Philadelphia ladies, where success was measured in clever conversation and advantageous marriages, here she could see the results of her efforts in clean rooms and satisfied boarders. The men who lived at the boarding house treated her with respectful distance, tipping their hats when they passed her in the halls, but keeping conversation to brief thank yous for meals well made. They had probably been warned by Aunt Margaret not to show her too much attention. Josephine appreciated their courtesy, even as she felt the loneliness of it. She did not see Harrison Vance again for nearly 3 weeks, though she found herself thinking of him often. She would be scrubbing laundry or kneading bread, and his words would surface in her mind. Shame has no place here. She wondered what sort of man said such things to a stranger. She wondered if he had sensed somehow that she needed to hear exactly those words, or if he spoke that way to everyone. Then one Saturday afternoon, when Aunt Margaret had sent her to the general store for supplies, Josephine saw him again. He was standing outside the mercantile, talking with two other cowboys, his hat pushed back and his face creased in laughter at something one of them had said. The sound of his laugh carried across the dusty street, warm and unguarded, and Josephine felt that same crack in the ice around her heart. She tried to slip into the store without being noticed, but Harrison looked up at exactly the wrong moment and their eyes met. His smile widened, and he excused himself from his companions, crossing the street with easy strides. "Miss Parker," he said, tipping his hat, "it is good to see you again. How are you settling into Silver Reef?" Josephine clutched her shopping list, suddenly hyper-aware of her faded work dress and the tendrils of hair escaping from her bun. "Well enough, thank you, Mr. Vance. Everyone has been very kind." "Harrison," he corrected gently. "I meant what I said about formality, and I am glad to hear it. Miss Margaret runs a respectable establishment, though I imagine the work keeps you busy." "It does," Josephine admitted. Something about his open, friendly manner made it difficult to maintain the walls she had built around herself. "But I do not mind. The work is honest." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, a deeper understanding than she expected. "There is dignity in honest work," he agreed. "I have been working ranches and cattle drives since I was 15, and I have learned that a person's worth is not measured by their past or their family name, but by the character they show each day." The words struck Josephine with almost physical force. Was he speaking generally, or had he somehow learned about her situation? Surely Aunt Margaret would not have told anyone, but perhaps rumors spread even here. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, shame flooding through her despite Harrison's kind tone. "I should go," she said quickly, turning toward the store entrance. "My aunt is expecting these supplies." "Wait." Harrison's hand moved as if to touch her arm, then stopped, hovering in the air between them. "Miss Parker, I hope I did not offend you just now. I only meant to say that Silver Reef is different from other places. People come here to escape all sorts of pasts. Debt, heartbreak, mistakes they wish they could undo. We do not judge each other for what came before. We only care about what folks do once they are here." Josephine blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "Why are you telling me this?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "Because when I saw you step off that train 3 weeks ago, you looked like someone who had forgotten how to hope. And I thought maybe, if you knew that this town does not deal in shame and judgment, you might remember how." The tears spilled over before Josephine could stop them. She turned away, mortified to be crying in the street, but Harrison stepped closer, positioning himself to block her from the view of passers-by. "Hey now," he said softly. "I did not mean to upset you. I have been told I sometimes speak too plainly. My mother used to say I had no sense of proper social graces." Josephine laughed through her tears, a broken sound that was half sob. "Your mother was wrong. What you said was kinder than anything anyone has said to me in nearly a year." When she finally looked up at him, Harrison's expression was so gentle, so completely without judgment that something inside her chest loosened. "I made a mistake," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Back in Philadelphia. I fell in love with the wrong man, and I believed his lies, and I paid a price that he never will. My family sent me here because I brought them shame. So I do not know how to believe what you are saying, that shame has no place in Silver Reef. I do not know how to be anything other than what I have become." Harrison was silent for a long moment, but he did not step back, did not let judgment cloud his features. "What you have become," he said finally, "is a woman who survived something hard and came out the other side. That takes strength, Miss Parker. Real strength, not the pretend kind that people put on for show. And I will tell you something else. Any man who would make promises to a woman and then abandon her when those promises became inconvenient is not worth your heartbreak. He is a coward and you deserve better. You do not even know me, Josephine whispered. Not yet, Harrison agreed. But I would like to. If you would allow me the honor of your acquaintance, I would be pleased to call on you properly, with your aunt's permission, of course. Josephine stared at him in disbelief. You cannot mean that. I just told you what I did, what happened. No decent man would want to associate with me, let alone court me. Then I suppose I am not decent by society's standards, Harrison said with a crooked smile. But by my own standards, I am doing exactly what feels right. You seem like a good person who was hurt badly, and you are trying to rebuild your life with courage and hard work. Those are the qualities I admire. The rest is just noise. Before Josephine could respond, the door to the mercantile opened, and an older woman emerged, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Josephine recognized her as Mrs. Chen, one of the merchants whose husband ran the shop. The woman's expression was curious but not unkind. Miss Parker, I thought I heard your voice. Do you need help finding something inside? The interruption broke the spell of the moment, and Josephine stepped back from Harrison, suddenly aware of how it must look, her standing in the street in tears while a cowboy spoke to her. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Chen. I have a list from my aunt. Come inside, then, and we will get you sorted. Mrs. Chen held the door open, then glanced at Harrison. Good afternoon, Mr. Vance. Madam. Harrison tipped his hat to both women, but his eyes stayed on Josephine. Miss Parker, I meant what I said. I would consider it an honor to call on you whenever you feel ready. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. Josephine nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled into the safety of the mercantile. Her heart was pounding, and her thoughts whirled in confused circles. Harrison Vance wanted to court her. A good, kind man with gentle eyes and strong hands wanted to court her, knowing what she had done. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Mrs. Chen helped her gather the items on Aunt Margaret's list, chatting pleasantly about the weather and the latest news from the mines. As she wrapped the purchases, she glanced at Josephine with knowing eyes. Harrison Vance is a good man, she said quietly. He works hard, treats everyone with respect, and keeps his word. Some of the cowboys who drift through town are rough sorts, but not Harrison. He has been in Silver Reef for 5 years now, saving money to buy his own ranch someday. If he has taken an interest in you, you could do far worse. I do not understand why he would, Josephine admitted. I am not anything special and I have nothing to offer. Mrs. Chen smiled. Perhaps he sees something in you that you do not see in yourself. That happens sometimes. The question is whether you are brave enough to believe him. The words stayed with Josephine as she carried the supplies back to the boarding house, as she helped prepare supper, as she lay awake that night in her narrow bed. Was she brave enough to believe Harrison? To believe that she could have a future beyond shame and punishment? It seemed too much to hope for, and yet the seed of possibility had been planted. The following Sunday, Josephine attended church services as required, sitting in the back pew with her eyes downcast as Aunt Margaret had instructed. The little church was packed with miners and merchants, ranchers and their families, all seeking salvation or community, or perhaps just a break from the harsh realities of desert life. The minister preached about forgiveness, and Josephine tried to let the words sink into her wounded heart. When the service ended, people filed out into the bright sunshine, gathering in small groups to chat. Josephine followed Aunt Margaret dutifully, keeping her distance from the conversations. But then Harrison was there, approaching with his hat in his hands and a respectful expression on his face. "Miss Margaret," he said politely, "I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment about a matter of some importance." Aunt Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What matter would that be, Mr. Vance?" "I would like your permission to call on your niece if she is willing. I know you run a respectable house, and I would not want to cause any impropriety. I thought it best to ask you directly." The request clearly caught Aunt Margaret off guard. She looked from Harrison to Josephine and back again, calculating. "My niece is here to work, not to engage in social frivolity. She has responsibilities." "I understand completely," Harrison said. "I would not want to interfere with her duties. Perhaps I could call on Sunday afternoons after church, or any time that suits your household's needs. I give you my word as a gentleman that my intentions are honorable." Aunt Margaret was silent for a long moment, and Josephine held her breath. Finally, her aunt spoke, her voice cold but resigned. "Very well. Sunday afternoons for 1 hour in the parlor where I can keep an eye on propriety. But understand this, Mr. Vance. My niece's father has entrusted her to my care, and I will not have her making poor decisions again. If your behavior proves anything less than appropriate, I will send you away permanently." "Yes, madam, I understand and respect your conditions." Harrison turned to Josephine, his expression hopeful. "Would that be agreeable to you, Miss Parker? If not, please say so. I will not be offended." Every instinct told Josephine to refuse, to protect herself from potential pain, to maintain the safe walls she had built. But something stronger than fear pushed the words from her lips. "Yes," she said quietly, "that would be agreeable." Harrison's smile could have lit the entire desert. "Then I will see you next Sunday, Miss Parker. Thank you, Miss Margaret, for your trust." He walked away before either woman could say anything else, and Josephine felt Aunt Margaret's disapproving glare like a physical weight. "I do not know what you have done to attract Mr. Vance's attention," her aunt said sharply as they walked back to the boarding house. "But do not mistake his interest for anything more than passing fancy. Men like him do not marry girls like you. He will realize his mistake soon enough, and then you will be left with fresh heartbreak. It would be better for everyone if you discouraged him now." The words should have stung, should have reinforced all of Josephine's doubts. Instead, they sparked something new inside her. Anger. Real, hot anger at the unfairness of it all. "Perhaps you are right, Aunt Margaret," she said, keeping her voice level. "Or perhaps Harrison Vance is different from the men you assume all men to be. Either way, I have accepted his invitation, and I will receive him on Sunday as agreed." It was the first time Josephine had stood up to her aunt, and the shock on Margaret's face would have been comical if the stakes were not so high. But Josephine refused to back down. She had spent months accepting punishment and judgment, believing she deserved every harsh word and cold shoulder. Harrison's kindness had reminded her that she was more than her worst mistake, and she would not let fear or her aunt's bitterness steal this fragile chance at something better. The week that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Josephine went through her daily tasks in a haze of anticipation and nervousness, rehearsing conversations in her head and then dismissing them as foolish. What would she and Harrison talk about? What did cowboys discuss with young women? Would he expect her to be witty and charming, skills she had learned in Philadelphia but had let atrophy in her months of isolation? The other boarders seemed to sense that something had changed. She caught them watching her with curious expressions, and one of the younger miners, a friendly man named Samuel who had always been polite, worked up the courage to speak to her while she served breakfast on Thursday morning. "Begging your pardon, Miss Parker, but there is talk in town that Harrison Vance has been given permission to call on you. I just wanted to say that is real fine. Harrison is one of the best men I know. You will be in good hands." The casual acceptance in his words nearly brought Josephine to tears. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel. That is kind of you to say. It is just the truth. Harrison helped me out when I first came to Silver Reef, did not know anyone, and was about to be thrown out of my lodgings for being short on rent. He lent me the money, no questions asked, and would not hear of me paying interest. Just said to pass the kindness along when I could. That is the sort of man he is." The story confirmed what Josephine had already sensed about Harrison, and it made her even more confused about his interest in her. Why would such a man want to spend time with someone as damaged as she was? Sunday finally arrived, bright and hot, and Josephine changed after church into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had somehow survived her journey from Philadelphia relatively unscathed. She pinned her dark hair carefully, studying herself in the small mirror above her washstand. Her face looked thinner than it had in her old life, her eyes shadowed by experiences that no young woman should have to endure. But there was also something new there, a tentative strength that had not existed before. Harrison arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair neatly combed and his boots polished. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, purple and yellow blooms that must have taken some effort to gather in this desert landscape. "Miss Parker," he said, offering her the flowers with a slightly nervous smile. "I thought these might brighten your room. They grow up in the hills where I sometimes ride." "They are beautiful," Josephine said, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Harrison." Aunt Margaret directed them to the parlor with obvious reluctance, then positioned herself in a chair near the doorway with her embroidery, making it clear she intended to monitor every word. But Harrison seemed unbothered by the surveillance. He sat in the chair across from Josephine and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his attention completely focused on her. "I am glad you agreed to see me," he said. "I was worried you might change your mind." "I nearly did," Josephine admitted. "Several times, in fact." "What made you decide to give me a chance?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I am tired of living in fear. For months I have been trying to make myself invisible, to accept that my life is over except for work and shame. But when you spoke to me, you made me remember that I used to have dreams. I used to believe in possibility. I do not know if I can get that back, but I would like to try." Harrison's expression grew serious. "Can I tell you something, Josephine? I hope you do not mind me using your given name, but Miss Parker feels too formal for what I want to say. Please call me Josephine. The first time I saw you step off that train, I felt like I had been kicked by a horse. You were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, but that was not what struck me. It was the way you held yourself, like you were made of glass and trying not to shatter. I have seen that look before, on people who have been broken by life and are trying to put themselves back together. And I thought, that is someone who understands what it means to survive. That is someone worth knowing." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "I was pregnant," she said quietly, aware of Aunt Margaret's sharp intake of breath behind her but pushing forward anyway. "The baby died shortly after she was born. Her father, the man who promised to marry me, disappeared the moment he learned of my condition. My family was humiliated and they sent me away. So you see, Harrison, I am exactly as broken as you thought. If you want to change your mind about courting me, I will understand." Harrison did not flinch, did not look away. "I am not going to change my mind, Josephine. What you went through was terrible and that man was a coward, but you survived it. You got on a train and traveled across a continent to start over, even though it must have been terrifying. You work hard every day to earn your place here, even though I suspect your aunt does not make it easy. That is not broken. That is strength. Most men would not see it that way. Josephine said. "Then most men are fools." Harrison's voice was firm, certain. "I mean it when I say shame has no place here, not in Silver Reef and especially not with me. Your past does not define who you are unless you let it." "And I would very much like to know who you are, Josephine Parker, beyond the tragedy that brought you west." Aunt Margaret stood abruptly, her embroidery falling to the floor. "That is quite enough, Mr. Vance. You cannot simply dismiss sin and scandal with pretty words. My niece made choices that brought dishonor to her family, and she must live with those consequences." Harrison rose to his feet, turning to face Aunt Margaret with quiet dignity. "With respect, madam, I believe Josephine has already lived with those consequences. She lost her child, her home, her family's support, and her place in society. How much more punishment does one mistake require? The Bible speaks of forgiveness and redemption, not endless condemnation." "You dare lecture me about the Bible?" Aunt Margaret's face flushed with anger. "I dare speak up for someone who deserves compassion," Harrison replied calmly. "And I will continue to do so, because Josephine is a good person who was hurt badly and is trying to rebuild her life. If that troubles you, then I apologize, but I will not apologize for caring about her." The parlor fell silent. Josephine sat frozen, watching this quiet cowboy defend her honor to her own aunt. No one had ever stood up for her like this. Not her parents, not her friends, certainly not Thomas. The gesture overwhelmed her, and she found herself standing, moving to Harrison's side. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him. "No one has ever defended me before." Harrison's expression softened. "Then they were all cowards. You deserve people in your life who see your worth." Aunt Margaret made a disgusted sound. "This is improper. I should never have allowed this visit." "Mr. Vance, I think it is time you left." "As you wish, madam." Harrison turned back to Josephine. "May I see you again next Sunday?" "Yes," Josephine said, not caring how her aunt might react. "I would like that very much. Then I will count the days." Harrison retrieved his hat and moved toward the door, but he paused to look back at Aunt Margaret. "Miss Margaret, I understand you are trying to protect Josephine, and I respect that. But please consider that your protection might be doing more harm than good. She does not need to be shielded from the world. She needs to be welcomed back into it." After he left, Aunt Margaret turned to Josephine with cold fury in her eyes. "You have made your choice, I see. Just as you made choices in Philadelphia. I pray this does not end as badly as that did." But Josephine felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Hope. Real, stubborn hope that refused to be extinguished by harsh words or bitter predictions. "I pray so too, Aunt Margaret, but I am willing to take the chance." Over the following weeks, Harrison became a steady presence in Josephine's life. He called every Sunday afternoon without fail, bringing small gifts, more wildflowers, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a beautiful piece of sandstone with fossilized ripples that reminded him of her, because it showed that beautiful things could be preserved even through time and pressure. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes. Harrison told her about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had died when Harrison was 12, and he had left home at 15 to find work, sending money back to his mother until his older brothers could take over the family property. He had worked ranches all through Colorado and New Mexico before coming to Utah, drawn by reports of good cattle country and opportunities for men willing to work hard. "I want my own place someday," he told her one Sunday, his eyes distant with the dream. "Nothing fancy, just enough land to run cattle and horses. A house that is sturdy against the winter, a barn that does not leak, and good water. That is all a man really needs to build a life." "It sounds wonderful," Josephine said, and meant it. The simplicity of his dreams was refreshing after the complicated social climbing of Philadelphia. She told him about her own childhood, about her mother's obsession with social status and her father's distance, always wrapped up in his business affairs. She described the endless lessons in deportment and music, the carefully orchestrated social events designed to attract suitable husbands. And finally, hesitantly, she told him about Thomas Whitmore. He seemed so different from the other young men, she said, staring at her hands. He talked about poetry and art, not just business and politics. He made me feel seen in a way I never had before, and when he said he loved me, I believed him. I thought we would announce our engagement, that my parents would be pleased I had found someone, but it was all lies. The moment I told him I was expecting, he said I must have trapped him on purpose, that he could not marry someone so manipulative. And then he was gone. Harrison reached across the space between them and took her hand, ignoring Aunt Margaret's disapproving gasp. His grip was warm and strong, anchoring her. He was wrong, Harrison said firmly, and he was a liar and a coward. I am sorry you had to learn that the hard way. I was so foolish, Josephine whispered. You were young and in love. That is not foolish, it is human. What he did to you, that was the sin, not what you did. Josephine looked up at him through tears. How can you be so kind? How can you not judge me? Because I have made my own mistakes, Josephine. Maybe not the same as yours, but I have done things I am not proud of. I have been in fights I should have walked away from. I have said cruel words in anger that I can never take back. I have disappointed people who believed in me. If someone had given up on me because of those mistakes, I would not be the man I am today. We all deserve the chance to be more than our worst moments. The sincerity in his voice, in his eyes, broke through the last of Josephine's defenses. She gripped his hand tightly, allowing herself to believe, truly believe, that maybe she could have a future beyond shame. As spring turned to summer, their courtship deepened. Harrison began meeting Josephine after church, walking with her through Silver Reef's dusty streets while Aunt Margaret followed at a disapproving distance. He showed her the beautiful desert landscape surrounding the town, pointing out the red rock formations and explaining how the ancient seas had created these layers of sandstone. He taught her to recognize the calls of different birds, to spot the subtle signs of wildlife in the seemingly barren landscape. One Sunday in early June, Harrison secured permission to take Josephine on a proper outing, a picnic lunch at a scenic overlook a mile outside town. Aunt Margaret reluctantly agreed, but only on the condition that she would accompany them as chaperone. Harrison accepted the terms with good grace, and they set out in the late morning, Harrison riding his horse while the two women sat in a small buggy he had borrowed for the occasion. The overlook was breathtaking, a high point that revealed the full sweep of the desert valley. Red rocks glowed in the sunlight, and the distant mountains formed a jagged horizon against the brilliant blue sky. Harrison spread a blanket in the shade of a twisted juniper tree, and they unpacked the lunch he had brought: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and early cherries from a farm down the valley. Aunt Margaret positioned herself on the far end of the blanket, her presence a constant reminder of propriety. But even she seemed affected by the beauty of the landscape, her usual sour expression softening slightly. Harrison and Josephine sat close together, not quite touching but aware of every breath, every small movement. They had been careful to maintain proper distance during his visits, knowing that Aunt Margaret watched their every interaction. But here, in the open air with the desert stretching endlessly around them, the constraints felt less suffocating. I could sit here forever, Josephine said softly, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. It is so peaceful, so far removed from everything complicated and painful. You could make a life here, Harrison said. In Silver Reef, I mean, or somewhere nearby. This land has a way of healing people if they let it. Josephine turned to look at him, studying his profile. In the months since they had met, he had become precious to her in ways she had not thought possible. He was nothing like the refined gentleman she had known in Philadelphia, but he was infinitely better. He was honest and kind and steady as stone. He made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since childhood. "Harrison," she said carefully, "where is this leading? I do not mean to be forward, but I need to know. My aunt is right that I cannot afford another mistake, another broken heart. If your interest in me is only passing, I would rather know now." Harrison set down his plate and turned to face her fully. "Josephine, I am 26 years old, and I have courted exactly 3 women before you. The first was when I was 17 and thought I knew everything about love, which is to say, I knew nothing at all. The second was a rancher's daughter in Colorado who was lovely, but wanted a life in the city that I could never give her. The third was here in Silver Reef 2 years ago. A widow who was kind but ultimately decided she wanted to return to her family in California. I tell you this so you understand that I do not enter courtships lightly, and I do not make promises I cannot keep." He reached out and took both of her hands in his, and even Aunt Margaret's scandalized throat clearing could not make him let go. "I am courting you because I believe you are the woman I want to spend my life with," Harrison continued, his voice steady and sure. "I know we have only known each other a few months, and by society's standards that is not long enough to be certain. But I am certain, Josephine. I love the way you face each day with courage even when you are afraid. I love your kindness to the boarders at your aunt's house, how you remember each man's preferences and make sure they feel welcomed. I love the way you see beauty in this desert that most people call barren. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you laugh when something truly delights you, like you had forgotten how and are surprised to rediscover the feeling. I love you, Josephine Parker, and I want to marry you if you will have me." The world seemed to stop spinning. Josephine stared at Harrison, his earnest face and steady eyes, and felt her heart crack open with a fierce and terrifying joy. He loved her. This good, honorable man loved her, knowing everything about her past, seeing all her flaws and wounds, and he loved her anyway. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am so afraid of being hurt again." "I know," Harrison said, "and I cannot promise that life will be easy or that we will never face hardship, but I can promise that I will never abandon you. I will stand beside you through whatever comes, and I will remind you every single day that you are worthy of love and respect. So I am asking you, Josephine, will you marry me?" Josephine looked past Harrison to where Aunt Margaret sat rigid with disapproval, and she realized that she did not care what her aunt thought. She did not care what society thought, or her parents, or anyone else who had decided she was beyond redemption. The only opinion that mattered was her own, and her own heart was shouting yes with every beat. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Harrison, I will marry you." Harrison's face transformed with joy, and before either of them could think better of it, he pulled her close and kissed her. It was Josephine's first real kiss since Thomas, but it was nothing like those secretive, guilt-tinged encounters. This was open and honest, a promise sealed with breath and warmth and hope. Aunt Margaret rose to her feet with a cry of outrage. "This is unseemly. I will not permit this." Harrison pulled back from the kiss but kept his arms around Josephine. "With respect, Miss Margaret, Josephine is 20 years old and she can make her own decisions. I have asked her to marry me, and she has accepted. I would appreciate your blessing, but we do not require your permission. You will have neither my blessing nor my permission." Aunt Margaret's voice shook with fury. Josephine has already proven she cannot be trusted to make wise choices about men. I took her in out of Christian charity, and this is how she repays me. By carrying on with the first cowboy who shows her attention. Josephine stood, keeping Harrison's hand firmly in hers. Aunt Margaret, I am grateful that you gave me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go, but I will not apologize for accepting happiness when it is offered to me. Harrison is a good man, far better than I deserve, and I am going to marry him. Then you can leave my house, Aunt Margaret snapped. I will not harbor a woman who has learned nothing from her mistakes. You will pack your things and be gone by tonight. The words should have been devastating, but Josephine felt only a strange lightness. She had been living in her aunt's house like a prisoner serving a sentence, earning each day's shelter through backbreaking labor and constant judgment. The prospect of leaving was not a punishment. It was a liberation. Very well, Josephine said calmly. I will collect my belongings this afternoon. Thank you for your hospitality, Aunt Margaret. I am sorry we could not part on better terms. Harrison squeezed her hand, pride evident in his expression. They gathered the remains of the picnic in silence and returned to Silver Reef, the buggy ride tense with Aunt Margaret's cold fury. When they arrived at the boarding house, Harrison helped Josephine down and spoke quietly so only she could hear. I have a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it is clean and respectable. There is a spare room where you can stay until we marry, or if you prefer, I am sure we can find another arrangement. I will not have you sleeping in the street. Josephine looked up at him with love so intense it almost hurt. Your house will be fine, Harrison. As long as we observe propriety until the wedding, no one can criticize the arrangement. Then we will marry as soon as possible, Harrison said. I will speak to the minister tomorrow morning. How does next Sunday sound? Perfect, Josephine said. Absolutely perfect. Aunt Margaret stood in the doorway of her boarding house, her face carved from granite. You are making a mistake, Josephine. When this cowboy abandons you just like the last man did, do not come crawling back to me. For months, such words would have shattered Josephine's fragile confidence. But now, standing beside Harrison with her hand in his, she felt only pity for her aunt's inability to recognize true goodness when it stood before her. He will not abandon me, Josephine said quietly. But if I am wrong, if the worst happens, I will still never regret choosing hope over fear. Goodbye, Aunt Margaret. She went inside and packed her meager belongings, the same small trunk and carpet bag she had arrived with months ago, but everything felt different now. She was not fleeing in shame. She was walking toward a future she had chosen for herself. Harrison was waiting when she emerged, and he loaded her trunk into the back of the buggy without comment. They rode through Silver Reef's dusty streets to a small adobe house on the eastern edge of town, set back from the road with a tiny vegetable garden struggling in the desert soil. It was modest, simple, nothing like the grand house she had grown up in. And it was the most beautiful place Josephine had ever seen. It is not much, Harrison said, suddenly nervous. But it is mine, bought with 5 years of saved wages. The spare room is here on this side. You will have your privacy and your own space. I will sleep in my room on the far side of the house, and we will maintain complete propriety until we are married. I give you my word. Josephine walked through the small house, taking in the simple furniture, the wood stove, the windows that let in the late afternoon light. Everything was clean and well maintained, reflecting the care Harrison brought to every aspect of his life. In the spare room there was a bed with a quilt that looked hand-stitched, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. It is perfect, she said and meant it. Thank you, Harrison. For everything. He stood in the doorway, respecting the boundaries he had promised to maintain. I will go speak to the minister first thing tomorrow. We will do this properly, Josephine. You will have a real wedding with witnesses and vows and everything you deserve." That night, Josephine lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the desert night. Harrison's house was quieter than Aunt Margaret's boarding house, without the constant creaking of floorboards or the sounds of 12 men settling in for sleep. She felt safe in a way she had not felt in over a year, protected not just by walls, but by the knowledge that someone truly cared about her well-being. The next morning, Harrison was already gone when Josephine emerged from her room, a note on the kitchen table explaining that he had gone to speak with the minister and would return by noon. Josephine explored the tiny kitchen, finding basic provisions and setting about making breakfast. It felt strange and wonderful to be cooking in her own space, or nearly her own space, without Aunt Margaret's constant supervision. Harrison returned at midday with good news. Reverend Thompson had agreed to perform the ceremony on Sunday afternoon, right after the regular church service. The minister had been surprised by the quick timeline, but had not questioned it when Harrison explained that Josephine had nowhere else to stay, and they wanted to do right by her reputation. "He asked if you had family who should be notified," Harrison said carefully. "I said I would discuss it with you, but that we were not delaying the ceremony regardless." Josephine considered. Should she write to her parents, inform them of her upcoming marriage? Part of her wanted their approval, some sign that they still considered her their daughter. But a larger part of her knew that approval would never come, and she was tired of seeking validation from people who had turned their backs on her. "No," she said. "I do not want them there. This is our beginning, Harrison, just ours. Let the past stay in the past." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then it is just us. Though I should warn you, word has gotten around town about our engagement. Several people stopped me this morning to offer congratulations. I think we may have more witnesses at the ceremony than we expected." The news should have worried Josephine, but instead it filled her with quiet happiness. In Philadelphia, her downfall had been public spectacle, whispered about in parlors and excluded from guest lists. But in Silver Reef, people seemed genuinely pleased that she had found happiness. The difference was striking. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Chen from the Mercantile appeared at Harrison's door on Wednesday morning with fabric for a new dress, refusing to take no for an answer. "Every bride deserves something special to wear," she said firmly, measuring Josephine with practiced efficiency. "I will have this ready by Saturday. No arguments. Consider it my wedding gift." Samuel, the young miner who had spoken kindly to Josephine weeks before, brought Harrison a bottle of whiskey for celebrating. Other townspeople stopped by with small offerings: a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of preserves, a set of embroidered handkerchiefs. Each gift was accompanied by warm wishes, and Josephine began to understand what Harrison had meant about Silver Reef being different. On Saturday, Mrs. Chen delivered the dress as promised, a simple but elegant design in pale green cotton that brought out the color of Josephine's eyes. Josephine tried it on in her small room and could hardly recognize herself in the mirror. She looked like a bride, like a woman on the verge of a new life. The haunted sadness that had shadowed her features for so long had been replaced by something softer: hope, joy, love. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. Josephine dressed carefully in her new gown, pinning her dark hair up with trembling fingers. Harrison had stayed with Samuel the night before, observing the tradition of the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Josephine was alone in the little house, but she did not feel lonely. She felt ready. She walked to the church alone, carrying the small bouquet of wildflowers that she had gathered yesterday from the hills. People were already arriving for the regular service, and many stopped to compliment her dress or wish her well. Even some of the rougher miners, men who spent their days in the dark tunnels beneath the earth, tipped their hats with genuine respect. Inside the church, Josephine slipped into a back pew as she usually did, but this time she did not keep her eyes downcast. She looked around at the assembled community, these people who had welcomed her, despite knowing nothing about her except that she worked hard and Harrison Vance loved her. Some of them probably suspected she had a difficult past, but no one seemed to care. She was one of them now, a part of Silver Reef's fabric. The regular service proceeded, Reverend Thompson's sermon focusing on new beginnings and God's endless capacity for forgiveness. Josephine wondered if he had chosen the topic specifically for her benefit, and she felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness of it. When the service ended, people remained in their seats instead of filing out. Harrison appeared from a side door, dressed in his best clothes, his face clean-shaven and his dark hair neatly combed. He looked nervous and excited, and when his eyes found Josephine's across the church, his smile could have lit the whole desert. Reverend Thompson invited Josephine to come forward, and she walked down the aisle with her head held high. There were no bridesmaids, no elaborate decorations, none of the pomp that would have accompanied a wedding in Philadelphia. But there was something better. There were dozens of faces smiling at her with genuine warmth, a community bearing witness to her new beginning. She reached the front of the church and took her place beside Harrison, who reached for her hand and held it tightly. Reverend Thompson opened his Bible and began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small space. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Harrison Vance and Josephine Parker in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly, but with reverence, commitment, and love. Harrison, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? I do, Harrison said, his voice steady and sure. Josephine, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? Josephine looked at Harrison, this man who had seen her at her lowest and offered not judgment but compassion. This man who had taught her that shame has no place in a life built on honesty and hope. This man who loved her for exactly who she was. I do, she said, her voice clear and strong. Harrison slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him with a ring Mrs. Chen had helped her purchase with the last of the money her father had sent months ago. It seemed fitting, using that final connection to her old life to symbolize her commitment to her new one. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thompson said. Harrison, you may kiss your bride. And he did, sweetly and tenderly, while the small church erupted in applause and joyful shouting. Josephine laughed through happy tears, and Harrison held her close, his arms strong and sure around her. They walked back down the aisle together, no longer two separate people but a united pair. Outside, the townspeople gathered to congratulate them, and someone produced a fiddle and someone else a guitar, and an impromptu celebration began right there in front of the church. Samuel approached with a wide grin. The boys and I took up a collection, he said, pressing a small leather pouch into Harrison's hand. It is not much, but we figured every new couple could use a little extra to get started. Harrison opened the pouch and stared at the coins inside, clearly moved. This is too generous. We cannot accept this. You can and you will, Samuel said firmly. You have helped most of us at one time or another, Harrison. This is just returning the favor. Besides, we take care of our own in Silver Reef, and Miss Josephine is one of us now. The casual acceptance, the automatic inclusion, overwhelmed Josephine. She had spent so long being defined by her mistakes that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply belong. "Thank you," she said to Samuel, to all of them. "Thank you so much." The celebration continued for hours, people dancing in the dusty street while the musicians played. Josephine danced with Harrison, then with Samuel, then with a dozen other miners and merchants who wanted to welcome her properly to the community. By the time the sun began to set, she was exhausted and happy, her feet sore from dancing and her face aching from smiling. Harrison finally extricated them from the crowd, laughing at the good-natured teasing from his friends. They walked back to his house, their house now, hand in hand through the cooling evening. Inside, the small space felt different, charged with the significance of what they had become to each other. "Are you tired?" Harrison asked, suddenly shy despite everything they had shared. "Yes," Josephine admitted, "but the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from joy instead of sorrow." Harrison led her to the bedroom, the room that had been his alone but was now theirs to share. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had been there earlier, placing fresh flowers on the dresser and turning down the bed. The thoughtfulness of it made Josephine's throat tight with emotion. "I want you to know," Harrison said softly, turning to face her, "that we do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready. I know that your previous experience was not good, that it was tangled up with lies and pain. I can wait as long as you need." Josephine reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. "I am ready, Harrison. I am your wife now, and I want to be your wife in every way. But I am a little frightened." "So am I," he admitted with a crooked smile. "I want to make this good for you, and I am afraid I will do something wrong." The honesty of it, the vulnerability, eased Josephine's nervousness. She rose on her toes and kissed him, trying to pour everything she felt into the gesture. Harrison responded with careful tenderness, his hands gentle as he began to undo the buttons of her dress. They came together in the soft lamplight, learning each other with patience and care. Harrison kept his promise, making it good for Josephine, erasing the painful memories of Thomas's selfish grasping with touch that spoke of reverence and love. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Josephine felt a peace she had not known was possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I did not think I could ever feel this way again, but I do. I love you so much." Harrison pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "I love you too, Josephine Vance. And I am going to spend every day proving that you were right to take a chance on me." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the desert night quiet and still around their small house, and Josephine dreamed of a future bright with possibility. The months that followed were the happiest of Josephine's life. She threw herself into making their small house a home, sewing curtains from fabric Mrs. Chen sold her at a generous discount, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn garden, learning to cook the hearty meals that Harrison needed after long days working on the ranch that employed him. In the evenings, they would sit together on the small porch, watching the sun set over the red rocks, talking about their days and their dreams. Harrison had not given up his goal of owning his own ranch, and now that dream included Josephine. They began saving every spare penny, planning for the day when they could buy land and build something that was truly theirs. The work was hard, but it was meaningful in a way that Josephine's old life never had been. Every meal she cooked, every shirt she mended, every small improvement to their home was a tangible contribution to their shared future. The townspeople fully embraced Josephine as one of their own. Mrs. Chen invited her to join the ladies' sewing circle that met every Thursday afternoon. And though Josephine was nervous at first, she soon found herself looking forward to those gatherings. The women of Silver Reef were different from the society ladies she had known in Philadelphia. They were ranchers' wives and merchants' daughters, former saloon girls who had married respectably and widows making their own way. They shared practical advice about everything from preserving food to dealing with difficult husbands, and they welcomed Josephine without prying into her past. One afternoon in late August, Mrs. Chen pulled Josephine aside after the sewing circle had dispersed. "I wanted to tell you," the older woman said, "how glad I am that you came to Silver Reef. You have brought Harrison such happiness. He was always a good man, but now he has a lightness about him that was not there before. And you have blossomed too, my dear. When you first arrived, you looked like a frightened rabbit. Now you look like a woman who has found her place in the world." Josephine hugged Mrs. Chen impulsively. "Thank you for being so kind to me, for welcoming me when you had no reason to. It has made all the difference." "We look after each other here," Mrs. Chen said simply. "That is what community means." As fall arrived and the desert heat moderated, Josephine began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses had always been irregular since the birth and loss of her daughter, so at first she thought nothing of missing one. But when she missed a second, and her breasts began to feel tender, and certain smells made her nauseated, she began to suspect the truth. She was pregnant. The realization brought a complicated swirl of emotions: joy at the prospect of carrying Harrison's child, terror at the memories of her first pregnancy and the tragedy that followed, fear that something would go wrong again, that she would lose this baby too. She told Harrison one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Her voice shook as she spoke the words, but his reaction banished her fears. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and when he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his face. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "I am frightened," Josephine admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this child like I lost the first?" Harrison cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Then we will face it together and we will survive it together. But Josephine, you cannot let fear steal your joy. This baby is a blessing, a gift. We will do everything right, get you proper medical care, make sure you rest enough, and we will hope and pray and believe that this time everything will be all right." His certainty helped calm her panic. Over the following days, Josephine allowed herself to feel excited about the pregnancy. Mrs. Chen, who had raised 4 children of her own, provided advice and reassurance. The other women in the sewing circle offered their own experiences and wisdom, creating a network of support that Josephine had not had during her first pregnancy. The doctor in Silver Reef, an older man named Dr. Morrison, who had practiced medicine in mining towns across the West, examined Josephine thoroughly and pronounced her healthy. "You are young and strong," he said. "I see no reason why you should not carry this baby to term and deliver safely. Just take care of yourself, eat well, rest when you need to, and come see me if anything feels wrong." As her belly began to swell, Harrison became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she take an afternoon rest every day, and worried constantly that she was working too hard. Josephine found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she teased him one evening as he refused to let her carry a basket of laundry. "I know," Harrison said, taking the basket from her anyway. "But you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I will not take any chances." Winter came to the Utah desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that transformed the red rocks into something magical. Josephine spent more time indoors, sewing tiny clothes for the baby and preparing the spare room to become a nursery. Harrison built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. Every evening, he would place his hand on her swollen belly and talk to the baby, telling stories about the ranch they would own someday and the life they would build together. As Josephine's due date approached in early March, she found herself thinking about her first baby more often. The daughter she had held for such a brief time, who had never had the chance to really live. She had not even been allowed to give her a proper name or a marked grave. Sometimes Josephine would wake in the night crying and Harrison would hold her and let her grieve. "I wish I could have given her better," Josephine said one night, her voice muffled against Harrison's chest. "She deserved to be loved and wanted, not born into shame." "You did love her," Harrison said firmly. "And she knew that, even in the short time she was here. But this baby, this one will have everything. Love and security and a home where she or he is celebrated. That is what you are giving this child, Josephine. A chance at the life your daughter did not get to have." The words helped, and Josephine carried them with her as she entered the final weeks of her pregnancy. On a bright morning in mid-March, as the desert began to wake from winter, her labor began. Harrison sent for Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Chen, then paced the small house like a caged animal while the women worked. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Josephine was certain she could not endure another contraction. But Mrs. Chen held her hand and spoke encouraging words, and Dr. Morrison remained calm and confident, and finally, after hours of struggle, the baby emerged with a furious cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Josephine's chest. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs." Josephine stared down at her son through tears of joy and relief. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a red, angry face that gradually calmed as he felt her heartbeat. She could not stop touching him, marveling at his tiny fingers and the miracle of his existence. Harrison was allowed in once the baby had been cleaned and wrapped in a blanket. He approached the bed with reverence, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked at his son. "Can I hold him?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Josephine placed the baby in his arms, and Harrison's face crumpled with pure joy. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you for the rest of my life. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." They named him Henry, after Harrison's father, and Philip, after Josephine's father, despite everything, because she wanted to believe that somewhere deep down, her parents cared about her happiness. The weeks following Henry's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Josephine learned to navigate the sleepless nights and constant feeding, while Harrison did everything he could to help, changing nappies and walking the floor with Henry when he was fussy. The townspeople brought meals and baby clothes, and the small house overflowed with the chaotic joy of new parenthood. As spring turned to summer, Henry grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling infant who recognized his parents' voices and grabbed at everything within reach. Josephine would watch Harrison playing with their son, making silly faces to elicit giggles, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch with Henry asleep in Josephine's arms, Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "I have been thinking," he said, "and I want to discuss something with you." "What is it?" Josephine asked, noting the serious tone in his voice. "Samuel is leaving Silver Reef. His brother out in California has offered him a job and he has decided to take it. He owns a small piece of land just outside town, about 40 acres with water rights and a decent cabin. He offered to sell it to me for a fair price, and I have been doing the math. With the money we have saved, plus the collection from the wedding, plus what I could get for this house, we could just barely afford it. Josephine's heart began to race. Your own ranch, the dream you have been working toward. Our ranch, Harrison corrected. Ours. It would be tight financially for a while, and we would have to work harder than ever. But Josephine, it is good land. We could start with a small herd, build it up over time. Maybe raise some horses too. It would be ours, something to pass on to Henry and any other children we might have. Josephine looked down at their sleeping son, then out at the desert landscape that had become home. A year ago, she had stepped off a train with nothing but shame and a carpetbag, certain her life was over. Now she had a husband she loved, a healthy baby, and the offer of land to build a future on. Yes, she said, smiling at Harrison. Let us do it. Let us build our ranch. The transaction happened quickly. Samuel was eager to complete the sale before leaving for California, and Harrison was equally eager to begin their new venture. By late August, they had moved to their new property, a collection of 40 acres with a small cabin, a barn that needed repairs, and a creek that ran year-round. The cabin was smaller than their house in town had been, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was solidly built and weatherproof. Josephine threw herself into making it comfortable, while Harrison began the work of repairing fences and preparing for livestock. They bought their first cattle in September, just 10 head, but it was a start. The work was relentless. Harrison was up before dawn every day, tending animals and mending fences and hauling hay. Josephine cared for Henry, maintained the household, planted a kitchen garden, and helped with ranch tasks whenever she could. Some days she was so exhausted she could barely stand, but she had never been happier. Their nearest neighbors, a family named the Westons who ran a larger ranch 2 miles away, proved to be good friends. Tom Weston gave Harrison advice on managing cattle in the harsh desert climate, while his wife Sarah shared strategies for gardening in the difficult soil. They had 3 children, and their oldest daughter, a cheerful girl named Annie, often came to visit and play with Henry as he grew older. Life fell into a rhythm dictated by seasons and animals. In the spring, they welcomed new calves and celebrated each successful birth. In the summer, they fought the heat and struggled to keep everything watered. Fall brought relief from the worst temperatures and preparations for winter. Winter tested their endurance with cold and occasional heavy snows, but they survived together. Henry grew into a sturdy toddler with Harrison's dark hair and Josephine's green eyes. He learned to walk holding onto the porch railings, took his first steps toward his father as Harrison returned from checking the herd, and spoke his first word, which was Papa, much to Harrison's delight and Josephine's mock indignation. When Henry was 2, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more excitement, though she still felt a pang of worry for the daughter she had lost years ago. This baby, another boy they named James, arrived on a cold December morning with less drama than Henry's birth. He was smaller and quieter than his brother, with fine blonde hair and a solemn expression that made visitors laugh. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Harrison's careful management and hard work paid off, and by the time Henry was 4 and James was 2, they had expanded their herd to nearly 30 head of cattle. Harrison also began raising horses, a passion he had harbored since childhood. He had a gift for training even the most difficult animals, and word spread through the region about Harrison Vance's quality horses. Josephine found her own niche in the ranch economy. She learned to make cheese and butter from their cow's milk, and her products became popular in Silver Reef and surrounding communities. She also developed a reputation for beautiful quilts, creating intricate patterns during the winter months when outdoor work was limited. On a warm spring evening in 1889, 5 years after Josephine had first arrived in Silver Reef, she and Harrison sat on their porch watching Henry and James play in the yard. Henry was chasing his younger brother around a clump of sage, both boys shrieking with laughter. The sun was setting behind the red rocks, painting everything in gold and rose. "You remember," Harrison said, taking Josephine's hand, "that first day when I saw you step off the train. I told myself I was going to speak to you, even though I had no reason to believe you would give me the time of day. I remember thinking you were the kindest person I had ever met," Josephine said. "You made me believe that maybe I deserved kindness, that maybe my life was not over." "Your life was not over. It was just beginning." Harrison pulled her close. "You have given me everything, Josephine. A home, a family, a purpose. I wake up every morning grateful that you took a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense." Josephine laughed. "And I am grateful you met my train and told me that shame has no place here. You saved me, Harrison." "We saved each other," he corrected. "And look what we have built together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their sons play as darkness gathered. The ranch was small by some standards, but it was theirs, paid for with sweat and sacrifice and love. The house had grown too, Harrison adding 2 more rooms as their family expanded. The barn was sturdy now, the fences mended, the herd healthy. Inside, Josephine had created a warm space filled with handmade quilts, curtains she had sewn, and small touches that made it a home. Above the fireplace hung a photograph from their wedding day, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Silver Reef. They looked so young in that image, Harrison barely containing his joy, Josephine's smile tentative but real. "I want to have more children," Josephine said suddenly. "If we are blessed with them, I want to fill this house with love and laughter, give Henry and James siblings to grow up with." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "Whatever you want, I want too. We will have as many children as God sees fit to give us, and we will raise them to be good people who understand that everyone deserves compassion and second chances." 2 more children did come in the following years. A daughter named Grace arrived in 1890, with Josephine's dark hair and a stubborn streak that made her parents laugh even as she tested their patience. Then, in 1892, another son they named Robert, who was cheerful and easygoing from the moment he entered the world. The ranch continued to prosper. Harrison's reputation for quality horses grew, and he began selling breeding stock to ranches across Utah and into Nevada. Josephine's dairy products and quilts provided steady supplemental income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, with money saved for emergencies and plans for the future. The children grew up surrounded by wide open spaces and hard work. Henry proved to have his father's gift with animals, spending hours in the barn learning to train horses. James was quieter and more studious, preferring books to barn chores, but always willing to help when needed. Grace was fearless, insisting on doing everything her brothers did despite being smaller and younger. Robert toddled after his siblings, adoring them all and earning the nickname Shadow for his refusal to be left behind. Silver Reef itself changed over the years. The silver mines that had given the town its reason for existence began to play out, and by the mid-1890s, many families were moving away. But the Vance family stayed, their ranch providing stability and purpose. They became pillars of the shrinking community, Harrison serving on the town council and Josephine organizing charity efforts for struggling families. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their courtship evolved into something richer, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering support. They had their disagreements, of course. Harrison could be stubborn about his methods for managing the ranch, and Josephine sometimes spent more on charity than they could afford. But they always worked through their differences with honesty and compromise. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Harrison surprised Josephine with a trip to Salt Lake City, their first real vacation since Henry's birth. They left the children with the Westons and took the train north, spending 3 days exploring the growing city, attending theater performances, and staying in a proper hotel. On their last evening, as they walked through the streets hand in hand, Harrison stopped suddenly. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I have never told you why I was at the train station that day we met, why I happened to be there when you arrived." Josephine looked at him curiously. "I assumed you were in town for supplies or something similar." Harrison shook his head. "I had no practical reason to be there. But the night before you arrived, I had a dream. In it, I saw a woman stepping off a train, looking lost and heartbroken. And I heard a voice telling me I needed to be there, that I needed to help her. So I went to the station, even though I felt foolish, even though I could not explain why. And then you appeared exactly like in my dream." Josephine stopped walking, staring at him. "Are you serious? I would not make something like that up. I have never been a particularly religious man, but I believe God or fate or something put me there to meet you. You were meant to come to Silver Reef, Josephine, and I was meant to be waiting when you arrived." Tears filled Josephine's eyes. "All this time, I thought it was just extraordinary luck that you happened to be there, that you happened to be kind. But you think it was more than coincidence. I know it was more than coincidence. We were meant to find each other, to build this life together. Everything you went through before, as painful as it was, led you to that train platform. And everything I went through led me there too. Our paths were always going to cross." Josephine wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. "Then I am grateful for every hard thing that happened, because it brought me to you." They returned to the ranch renewed and energized, throwing themselves back into the daily rhythms of family and work. The children were delighted to have them home, and Josephine savored the chaos of bedtime stories and skinned knees and endless questions about everything under the sun. As the years passed, Josephine occasionally thought about her life in Philadelphia, about the girl she had been before tragedy reshaped her. Sometimes she wondered what had become of Thomas Whitmore, whether he ever thought about what he had done or felt any regret. Mostly, though, she did not think about him at all. He was a ghost from another life, powerless to touch the happiness she had found. She never heard from her parents again. At first, their silence hurt, a wound that would not quite heal. But eventually, she realized that their rejection had been a gift. It had forced her to build a new life, to discover strengths she had not known she possessed, to find real love instead of the hollow social performance she might have settled for in Philadelphia. When Henry turned 16 in 1900, he announced his intention to stay on the ranch and work beside his father full-time instead of pursuing further education. Harrison was proud but wanted to ensure his son understood what he was choosing. "Ranching is hard work, son. It is long hours and uncertain income and being at the mercy of weather and markets. You are smart enough to do anything you want. Are you sure this is what you choose?" Henry did not hesitate. "This is what I want, Pa. I want to build on what you and Ma started, grow this ranch even bigger, maybe buy more land someday. This is where I belong." Harrison looked at Josephine, and they shared a smile of parental pride. Their son had chosen the life they had built, valued the legacy they were creating. It was affirmation of everything they had worked for. James surprised them by announcing he wanted to become a teacher. He had always been the most bookish of their children, and he had a gift for explaining things to his younger siblings. With some careful saving and the help of a small scholarship, they sent him to the normal school in Cedar City to earn his teaching certificate. Grace, at 10 years old, declared that she was going to be a rancher like her father and brother, and no amount of gentle suggestion that women usually did not pursue such careers could dissuade her. She rode as well as her brothers, could rope a calf with impressive accuracy, and had no patience for traditional feminine pursuits. "Let her be herself," Harrison told Josephine when she worried about Grace's lack of interest in traditional women's skills. "The world is changing. Maybe by the time she is grown, women ranchers will not be such an oddity." Robert, the baby of the family even at 8 years old, remained cheerfully undecided about his future. He liked animals but also liked building things, and he spent hours helping Harrison with construction projects around the ranch. In 1902, Silver Reef officially became a ghost town, the last of the mines closing and most remaining residents moving away. But the Vance family stayed, along with a handful of other ranching families who valued the land more than the silver beneath it. The church closed, the school consolidated with one in a neighboring town, and the mercantile that Mrs. Chen had run for so many years finally shuttered its doors. Mrs. Chen and her husband moved to Salt Lake City to be near their daughter, and Josephine cried when they said goodbye. Mrs. Chen had been her first real friend in Utah, the first person besides Harrison to make her feel welcomed and valued. "You take care of that good man of yours," Mrs. Chen said, hugging Josephine tightly. "And take care of yourself. You have built something beautiful here, something lasting. I am so proud of the woman you have become." With Silver Reef fading away, the Vances became even more isolated, though neighboring ranches were still within riding distance. They made trips to the larger towns for supplies and church services, but the ranch was their world, and they were content with that. As Josephine entered her 40s, she found herself reflecting on the journey her life had taken. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stepped off a train with a carpetbag and a heart full of shame. She was a woman who had survived tragedy, rebuilt her life from nothing, raised 4 good children, and partnered with an extraordinary man to create something meaningful. One evening in the summer of 1904, 20 years after that fateful train ride, Josephine and Harrison climbed to a high point on their property. From there, they could see the full expanse of their ranch, the house and barn and corrals, the cattle dotting the landscape, the horses grazing in the far pasture. Henry was down there somewhere, checking the herd. Grace was probably in the barn, though she was supposed to be helping with dinner preparations. James would return from his teaching post in a neighboring town in a few weeks for summer vacation. Robert was fishing in the creek with one of the Weston boys. 20 years, Harrison said, echoing Josephine's thoughts. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you on that train platform. Other times it feels like we have always been together." "I feel the same way," Josephine said. "And Harrison, I need you to know something. I need you to know that you gave me back my life. Before I met you, I thought I was destined to live in shame forever, punished endlessly for one mistake. You showed me that was not true. You showed me that I deserved love and respect and happiness. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Harrison pulled her close. "And you saved me right back. I was drifting before you came along, working hard but without real purpose beyond vague dreams of someday owning land. You gave me a reason to build something, someone to build it for and with. You made me better than I was." They stood together as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple and gold. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family, and a legacy from nothing but determination and love. "Shame has no place here," Harrison said softly, repeating the words he had spoken to her 2 decades earlier. "It never did and it never will. This is a place of second chances and new beginnings. This is home." Josephine rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute reliability of his presence. "Yes," she agreed, "this is home, and I would not change a single thing about the journey that brought us here." They walked back down to the house together, hand in hand as they had been for 20 years, as they would be for all the years still to come. Behind them, the desert spread endlessly, harsh and beautiful and full of promise, just like the life they had made together. Just like the love that had saved them both. In the house, Grace had finally come in from the barn and was helping prepare dinner. Robert rushed in with a string of fish, proudly displaying his catch. The evening sounds of home surrounded them, laughter and conversation, the clatter of dishes, the sound of someone playing a harmonica in the distance. Josephine moved through her kitchen with practiced ease, directing the dinner preparations while chatting with her children about their days. Harrison sat at the table they had built together, watching his family with contentment written in every line of his face. This was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of during those early, difficult years. As they gathered around the table for dinner, holding hands while Harrison said grace, Josephine looked at each beloved face. Her children, healthy and strong and good-hearted. Her husband, still handsome after all these years, still capable of making her heart skip with a single smile. This was her real family, bound not by obligation or social expectation but by genuine love and mutual respect. "I am grateful," she said when the prayer ended, "for every single day I get to spend with all of you. For this home, this ranch, this life we have built together. I am the luckiest woman in the world." "We are the lucky ones," Henry said. "You and Pa taught us what real love looks like, what it means to work hard for something you believe in. That is the best gift you could have given us." The conversation flowed easily through dinner, everyone sharing stories and plans and dreams. When the meal ended and the dishes were cleared, they moved to the porch to enjoy the cool evening air. Robert played with his new puppy while Grace challenged Henry to a roping contest that ended with both of them laughing and arguing good-naturedly about who had won. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Harrison and Josephine sat on the porch swing he had built for their 10th anniversary. The desert night was alive with sounds, crickets, and the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustling of wind through sage. "Do you ever think about how different your life might have been?" Harrison asked quietly. "If Thomas Whitmore had married you as he promised, if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" Josephine considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine that life would have been better. It might have been easier in some ways, more comfortable materially, but it would not have been real. Thomas did not love me the way you do. He loved the idea of me, the social advantage I represented. If we had married, I would have spent my whole life trying to be something I am not, always wondering if I was enough." "You are more than enough," Harrison said fiercely. "You are everything. So are you, and that is the difference. With you, I can be exactly who I am. I do not have to pretend or perform or hide parts of myself. You saw me at my absolute worst, broken and ashamed and lost, and you loved me anyway. How could I ever regret the path that led me to you?" They rocked gently in the swing, wrapped in each other and in the peace of their shared life. Above them, stars emerged in their thousands, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. The vastness of the universe put their small concerns into perspective, reminded them how precious and fleeting life was, how important it was to cherish every moment. "I want to grow old with you," Josephine said. "I want to watch our children have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch when we are gray and bent and remember all the adventures we had together. I want to love you until my very last breath." "Then that is exactly what we will do," Harrison promised. "We will grow old together, surrounded by family, proud of what we have built. And when our time comes, we will leave this world knowing we lived fully, loved deeply, and made a difference." The years continued to unfold, bringing the inevitable mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up any life. James married a schoolteacher he met at the normal school, and they settled in a small town 30 miles away where they both taught. They had 3 children, giving Harrison and Josephine their first grandchildren. Henry married Annie Weston, the neighbor girl who had played with him as a child, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch, planning to eventually take over the operation when Harrison was ready to slow down. Grace, true to her stubborn nature, never married. She remained on the ranch, becoming as skilled a rancher as her father and brother, earning grudging respect from men who initially dismissed her as a novelty. She expanded the horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for quality that stretched across 3 states. Robert eventually left ranching to become a carpenter, finding his calling in building homes and barns for the growing communities scattered across southern Utah. But he returned to the family ranch often, bringing his wife and children for extended visits that filled the house with noise and laughter. Through it all, Harrison and Josephine remained partners in every sense. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market crashes and sick animals, the inevitable challenges of life. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, including the loss of Harrison's mother in 1908 and the devastating blow of losing Henry to pneumonia in 1912. That loss nearly broke them both, and they clung to each other through the grief, learning that even the deepest sorrow could be survived when you did not face it alone. By 1920, Harrison and Josephine were in their 50s, still working the ranch but gradually turning more responsibility over to Grace and Henry's widow Annie, who had stayed on the land with her 3 children. The house that had once seemed so spacious when it was just the 2 of them now felt almost too large, most of the children's rooms empty except when grandchildren visited. They took to spending their evenings on the porch, reviewing the day's work and making plans for tomorrow. Their conversations had the comfortable rhythm of people who had known each other for decades, who could communicate as much with silence as with words. One warm evening in late spring, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky, Josephine reached over and took Harrison's hand. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what Mrs. Chen told me all those years ago, about being brave enough to believe in second chances. I do not think I really understood what she meant at the time. I thought she was just being kind, saying pretty words to make me feel better. But now I understand. Believing in second chances is not naive optimism. It is a choice, a deliberate decision to hope even when hope seems foolish. It is the bravest thing a person can do." Harrison squeezed her hand. "You were very brave, Josephine. You got on that train not knowing what waited for you at the other end. You accepted my courtship even though you had every reason to protect your heart. You chose hope over fear again and again. That is courage." "We were both brave," Josephine corrected. "You chose to love someone that society said was damaged goods. You stood up to my aunt and defended my honor when no one else would. You built this life with me, stone by stone and year by year. We were brave together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts aligned. Around them, the ranch hummed with the subtle sounds of life, horses moving in the pasture, cattle settling for the night, the creek flowing endlessly toward some distant sea. This was their legacy, Josephine realized. Not just the land or the buildings or the thriving herd, not even the children and grandchildren, though they were certainly part of it. Their real legacy was the proof that broken things could be mended, that shame could be overcome, that love was stronger than judgment. They had shown by example that everyone deserved a second chance, that past mistakes did not define a person's future unless you let them. In the years that followed, as they grew older and slower, they never lost sight of what they had built together. Harrison's hair turned silver and his back grew stiff from decades of hard work, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at Josephine. Her face gained lines that mapped every smile and every tear, and her hands grew gnarled from a lifetime of labor, but she remained beautiful in Harrison's eyes. Their grandchildren grew up hearing the story of how their grandmother had arrived in Silver Reef with nothing but a carpet bag, and how their grandfather had met her train and told her that shame has no place here. It became family lore, a story about the power of kindness and the importance of judging people by their character rather than their past. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Harrison stood and raised his glass. 40 years ago, I met a woman on a train platform who changed my life completely. She was brave and beautiful and stronger than she knew. She took a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than common sense, and together we built something that will outlast us both. Josephine, you have been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Here is to 40 more years. I will settle for whatever time God grants us, Josephine said with a laugh, standing to embrace him. But I want you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. You taught me that I was worth loving, that my past did not define my future, that shame truly has no place in a life built on honesty and hope. You gave me everything that matters. They kissed while their family applauded and cheered. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Harrison and Josephine walked slowly back to their porch, the same spot where they had spent countless evenings over the decades. The ranch spread out before them in the darkness, every acre familiar, every structure holding memories of sweat and struggle and triumph. We did it, Josephine said softly. Everything we dreamed of that first year when we were so young and so scared, we did it all. We did it together, Harrison corrected, pulling her close. That is what matters, not what we accomplished, but that we accomplished it side by side as true partners. They stood wrapped in each other as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night, on the births of their children, through every joy and every sorrow. The desert night was cool and peaceful, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled a lonely song that somehow sounded like a benediction. This was their life, simple and profound, built from the ruins of what had come before. This was their love story, not fairy tale perfect, but real and lasting and true. This was their home, the place where shame held no power and second chances were always possible. And as they stood together in the darkness, Harrison and Josephine Vance knew with certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find. In each other, they had discovered not just love but redemption, not just partnership but purpose. They had proved that no mistake was too great to overcome, no pain too deep to heal, no journey too difficult to complete when you had the right person by your side. The cowboy had met her train and told her that shame has no place here. And together, they had built a life that proved those words true, a legacy of love and second chances that would endure long after they were gone. It was everything they had hoped for and more than they had dared to dream. A happily ever after earned through courage, sustained through devotion, and cherished until the very end of their days.